I remember reading somewhere that you have argued that US tariffs really don't matter for India. Would you elaborate, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so you see, I have not yet cited that as a concern or as a reason for the market's underperformance. But that's not probably what you will hear if you talk to foreign investors. So foreign investors seem to be very focused on this, and it's more a signaling than material impact to the economy. So the goods under the tariff announcement made by the president of the US has affected about 1.2% of India's GDP. So as such, it is not so critical for performance of the economy. But of course, that 1.2 can create a drag and want to have that drag of 30, 40 basis points. So we want to put that behind us. But it's not a catastrophe for India. Now I know, and we all know from what's coming out in the press, is that a deal is underway and it's probably likely to come through before the end of the year, which will take that overhang away. And that's in our base case assumption for 2026 that this overhang will cease. Foreign investors might be quite actually positive about this, and you'll probably get a little bit of a pop on the Nifty, but it's not changing the secular story, which in any case in India's the situation is quite positive. So the US tariff deal is a good thing for India to have, but it has not been a problem so far for the market or for the economy as such.
What would be the themes that you would bet on, for the next decade or so? What are the big thematic stories that will emerge?
So see, I think we'll step back a little bit here. Why are multinational companies so excited about India? And the singular reason for their excitement is the consumer of this country. India has a unique income pyramid. It has cohorts running into millions of potential consumers in across income baskets, right from the bottom, where we still have a few very poor people living in sub-Sahara conditions, to the top, where we have 5 million households that can afford anything on the planet. This unique income pyramid makes India extremely attractive for anyone who wants to grow their business. And given our view that India is likely to account for 20% of incremental global growth over the next 15, 20 years, and probably that number is rising, not falling. If you, depending on what product or service you sell to your consumers, India could be between 10 and 100% of a particular multinational company's growth over the next 10 years. So it is unavoidable. Because India is becoming far more important for your business, do it out of a factory in India. And this essentially sets the stage for a manufacturing revival. And of course, it's backed by policy. So it actually helps a manufacturing revival. So keep this in the background. India enjoys a very strong position in the global market, is likely to attract a fair amount of FDI in the coming years, and is likely to see an increasing share of manufacturing. On the other side, India is the only country that has actually nailed services exports at scale. Nobody has done that. And if you look at the services traded globally, that's actually growing much more than the manufacturing trade. So last year, for example, the world economic output was about $105 trillion. 65 trillion was services, 40 was manufacturing. Of the 40, 24 was traded. So 60% on average of the stuff that people around the world buy is not manufactured at their home country. It is manufactured outside. Of the 65 trillion, only 8 was traded. It was about 4 trillion 10 years ago. So the share of services in global trade has actually doubled in the increased materially over the last 10 years, and the absolute number has doubled. Now, I dare say, given all the geopolitics that is going around, manufacturing share in total output traded share may not increase going forward, because more and more countries are seeking to rebuild factories in their home countries. Services, on the other hand, has potential to grow a lot. Of the 65 trillion, we reckon about 40 can be traded. There's some stuff that cannot be traded, like your next meal or your next haircut. But there's a lot that can be traded. So 8 can go to 40. Now, India's market share of this 8, ex-tourism, is about 6%. I won't be surprised if India doubles this share in the next 10 years. And if you double the total amount of traded services in the next 10 years, that's a $2 trillion export opportunity. It's a 5-fold increase from where India is right now. It is enormous, and there's no competition. China is nowhere close to doing this. Nowhere. Anybody else doesn't have the scale that India has. So when you combine these two big macro backdrops, I think the thing that you will find is that the Indian consumer will be the toast of town, and everything relating to consumption, I think, will do well. From a stock market perspective, of course, at any point in time, you have to pay attention to valuations, because if you buy something very expensive, even if the business does well, you may not make money on the stock. So keep that in mind. But there are enough attractively priced consumer companies or shares that I think investors should look at. The second is, I think lending businesses will do also very well. India's starting point of private credit to GDP is somewhere in the mid 70s. And there's no reason for this not to go past 100 in the next 10 years. So lending businesses may actually outperform the economy. And the reason for this is there's been a dramatic psychological shift amongst younger generation. They're willing to spend their future, which older generations did not. My father did not. I have not done that. Now, this all ends very badly in the future, but that future is probably 50 years from now. The world, by the way, is grappling with this because it has spent its future away. India has yet to spend its future, but it will eventually. But when you spend your future, your near term actually gets better. Manufacturing, as I mentioned, I think inside that there are some interesting subsectoral opportunities. We're indigenizing defense. We're creating a supply chain in semiconductors. Shipbuilding is another interesting place. I think the whole electronic supply chain, because of the increasing home production of mobile phones, is another place to look at. So quite a few interesting manufacturing subsectors to look at. And finally, I'll just make one last point. Energy. I think it's a major theme. Last year, India consumed about 800 watts per person per day. That number compares with 9,000 in America. And it's a fraction of what the world does, especially the Western Hemisphere and China. And India's energy consumption is set to boom in the coming years. And that, I think, is going to lend its to great downstream opportunities as India's energy infrastructure gets created.